Well, we now go to Harare, where Peter Ndoro is standing by at the election center. Peter, we've just seen the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission briefing the media. What came out of that briefing?
Well, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, welcome back to Harare. And as it's been common, actually, what's been happening is we have hot days, and once the sun disappears, we have chilly evenings. So it's a bit brisky this evening, but I think a lot of people are not going to be focusing on the weather. They're going to start to want to see what their results are telling them about what they did throughout the course of the day. And one of the things that came out of that briefing from the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission was that the average turnout at most of the polling stations across the country was a whopping 75%. That's a huge turnout. And I suppose what it says is that most Zimbabweans really wanted to get their voice heard. What it translates to, well, that's something we're going to have to explore, and somebody that might be able to help us do that is Professor Moore. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome back.
Thanks again, Peter. Go ahead. Yeah.
So 75%. I mean, that's a brilliant turnout. I think most developed nations would love to see their voters that interested in an election.
Yeah, you're right. I was just going to say, 54% in USA and so on. I think it shows how important politics is in societies like this, where it can really make a difference, because there is just so much power and so much economic power within the political system. Where that goes, I guess historically the opposition often gets the interested voters out. It depends, I guess, a lot on the local relations that political leaders have with their constituencies. So I'm not sure what one can tell from that number alone, and it does seem to be pretty quick coming in. And I think it shows that ZEC wants to wrap this up, at least as far as the presidential election goes, as quickly as they can.
So yeah, 75%. I mean, what you're saying is yes, they definitely want their voices heard, and I just wonder. There's a greater appreciation just how high the stakes are, and that perhaps for the first time there's an understanding or appreciation or a belief that the poll is going to be fair, and that's why they showed up.
And it's apparently much harder to rig an election if you have a lot of voters really going for it. Yep, the expectations are very high, which of course means if the result is too close for many people's comfort, they're also going to be expressing their discontent. I was talking to one chap who was in, I think, Mashonaland West, and he was saying that turnout was quite low. As you know, this is where there's been much more support for Robert Mugabe and his associates than for Mnangagwa. Another guy I was speaking to who was down in the Gutu area was saying that Mnangagwa really played the ethnic card, the Karanga card. I'm the real homeboy. You people should go with me. And that one is uncertain which way it's going to go. Midlands is uncertain. Manika land, apparently, the people I was talking to who were traveling around will probably go MDC, they're saying. The strongholds are the strongholds, the cities. And I'm not sure what's happening in Manabele land. So I think still we're talking about, it's still too early to tell.
Yeah. All right, so whoever wins, are we seeing a new era of Zimbabwean politics, do you think?
Oh, definitely. As we've said 100 times before, there's no more Mugabe, at least not too much of him, and Morgan Tsvangirai. People are sort of talking coalition, GNU. What sort of conditions have been set by the MDC alliance? Would that be peaceful? Also, still, I think people are concerned about what is happening in the barracks, and which of the seniors would push hard. If there was an MDC victory, where would they go? That's going to be still a very difficult one to call.
So if we take the personalities aside and take away the histories of the parties to one side, When I was listening to their speeches, I didn't see a lot different. I mean, you could almost transpose both speeches and they'd belong to each party. So if they believe in the same things, is it possible that they might find common ground much sooner than we think?
Well, perhaps the fact that their divisions are minuscule on economic policies mean the divisions and the factions could be more important because you're just fighting about that instead of policy and ideology. I did hear someone say that at one point Constantino Chiwenga, the vice president and minister of defense, say, if you don't pay your rates, I mean, if you're not getting water and electricity, you shouldn't pay your rates. But what didn't happen this time compared to 2013 is when Ignatius Chombo, who was Minister of Local Government, said, we have absolved your rates, you know, and that broke the cities for 3 years. So we're not seeing kind of crazy policies like that. Farmers who got farms from ZANU-PF from 2000 and on, I think are worried about losing those farms. And because there's no tenure, they would fear that if they voted the wrong way, they would lose their farms. So those sorts of things are there. And of course, the Mnangagwa regime has promised compensation for the white farmers and have been more open about thinking about private tenure, freehold, that sort of thing. Freehold is difficult because if you're poor and not holding onto your farm, you're going to lose it to the neighbor who's doing well, and you'll get very quick differentiation among the farmers. But that seems to be the ideology of let's have a piece of land so we can have collateral would be important. And, you know, the agricultural, like Mnangagwa was saying we're going to be free, liberal economy. But what really got him popular was the increase in the price of maize through command agriculture. And you're hearing a lot more about other commands. And that's not the free market. So if he had the power and if that economic sort of strategy was still there, that would go counter to what the IMF and the World Bank and so on want. There's possibilities that if this election is seen as free and fair and it turns out all right, you know, 2 weeks down the road and there's the runoff isn't necessary. The runoff would scare people, I think. People would be scared of 2008 again. But, you know, the donors have been sort of holding this carrot out and the stick is, you know, you better do your free and fair. And then there'd be a long series of negotiations with the IMF, the Lima Accord that was sort of accepted and then dropped, and you might get heavily indebted, poor country relief, that sort of thing.
Why do you think this election has garnered so much international attention? Why are all eyes on this country with a small population, 12 million people, in southern part of Africa? Why are so many people interested in what happens here? Well,
it's that old kind of story, you know, the old connection between Britain and flubbing on the UDI with Ian Smith, and Wilson wasn't sending in his troops and could have solved the problem pretty easily back then. And it's that kind of white thing, you know, the West, Anglo world sees this, and South Africa in many ways, as the last kind of outpost of white civilization. That makes the news. As Thabo Mbeki used to say often, you know, why isn't anybody really watching the DRC, where millions of people are dying as a result of that war? So it's this interesting sort of microcosm of the end of empire. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Kenya to an extent, the white population there. So I think that's kind of focused, and English speaking, you know, that always is much better for a journalist to come in from the New York Times to an English speaking country. So it's that kind of, and it's kind of interesting too that the UK, with its problems with Brexit, this is kind of a signal for them to play a key role, the leading sort of international set of actors in this country, to play a key role in facilitating a smooth transition whether they bend towards a sort of soft authoritarian idea that, do they think Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF are another Kagame and the RPF and the RPA? I'm not sure. But I think there has been since the Cold War, there's been less appetite as time has gone on from the West, quote unquote, for this magical liberal democracy to come in and solve all Africa's problems. There was one heck of a lot of support for the MDC in those early days, and now that's not so much there anymore. The MDC has been pretty broke for a lot of this election. They've done very, very well to get the momentum that they've got now.
All right, so we've been talking about the international community. Let's talk about Africa. They're watching this election, and what does it mean for the continent if we find that this election goes well and people accept the result and Zimbabwe is able to move on?
Well, then it's fantastic, because SADC and the AU accepted this unexpected but peaceful transition. That's the way the American Catholic magazine described it when they were interviewing Fidelis McConery, the priest who's so close to Mugabe. Unexpected but peaceful transition. So, it has not been labeled a coup, the November events. And if there is a rough time in the interregnum between now and the runoff, if there's a runoff, and if there's a rough time during the runoff, the AU and the SADC will look very, very bad. So they have a lot riding on this free and fair idea, I think. I'm not sure what influence they have when the observer missions discuss a common platform, who will take the lead, to what extent will the political masters override what the more neutral observers are seeing. It'll be interesting to see the reports. It'll be interesting to be a fly in the wall at their discussions.
All right, fly in the wall. Great place to end. Last question: who's going to sleep easier this evening, do you think?
I think Robert Mugabe will be sleeping very well. It's not too hard for him to sleep. I'm not sure if any of the real political bigwigs will be sleeping too much tonight. I think they'll be talking about possibilities, how to avoid, how to cool down the ardor of people who might want to go on the streets, how to make sure the military keeps its cool, how to keep some of the coup masters to keep their cool. I'm not sure if anybody's going to be sleeping. It's probably too cold to sleep.
Prof. Dave, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Peter.
All right, so that's where we're going to end this particular conversation. But what did happen a short while ago was that press conference that was held by the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, and making some first announcements about how the day went, the kind of observations that they've made, and we'll be getting those on the regular, certainly in the coming days. But what we're going to do is we're going to leave you now from here in Harare, and we're going to leave you with the full